Hello, I'm Anjit Trivedi. I'm from Department of English. Yes, sir, I'm shared.
Now we are seeing Google Classroom page.
Yes, sir, just. Now my screen is visible.
Loading.
Okay, sir. Okay, today's presentation is given by me and Khushbu. Today's presentation is given by me and Khushbu. Our topic is comparative literature in India and overview of its history. Here is a abstract of this article. This article is talking about the overview of the trajectory of the comparative literature in India, focusing on the preliminary on the Department of Jadavpur University, where it began, and some of the extents to Department of the Modern Indian Languages and Literary Studies. In University of Delhi, where is later had a new beginning in that the engagement within the Indian literature. In Jadavpur University began with the legacy of the Rabindranath Tagore's speech about the world literature, and with the modern poets translator as its founder. And in abstract, we see the influence and the analogy of the studies cross culture literary relations to the focus on the receptions and the transformations. And last few years of that, the comparative literature has taken a new perspective, engaging with the different areas of the culture knowledge, and particular those are related to marginalized space, along with the focus on recovering the new areas of the non-hierarchical literary relations. Now, here is a key point of this article: the beginning, the Indian literature of comparative Indian literature as a comparative literature, centers of comparative literature and studies, rectifying of the area of comparison, the research directions, the interface with the translation studies and cultural studies, the non-hierarchical connectivity. The in the beginning part the we In the beginning part, we see about the Tagore and the Bose idea. The Tagore used the word talk about the Visva Sahitya, means world literature, and started that the world was generally termed the comparative literature. His idea of the Visva Sahitya was a complex marked by the sense of a community of artists as a work building together. The identifies to that the word of literature. The notion of literature against was deeply embedded on a human relationship, and hence the aesthetic sense was linked with the sense of the human. And Bo's perspective of the comparative literature is the Bose was also well known for the translation, the translation of the Baudelaire, Heldorian, and that the Kalidas wrote in that the preface of that the translation of a less furious the mal, the translation of that the flower of evil. That is the intentions turning to the French poetry was move away from that the literary of the British, the colonial masters. While his introduction to the translation of the Kalidas Meghdootam, he wrote that he was essential to bring life the literature of ancient times in a particular translation, particular tradition, in order to make a part this contemporary. Now we further move from the Indian literature as a comparative literature. In between, we talk about the three university, the ICLA, Indian Comparative Literature Associated, the Delhi University of the Comparative Indian Literature Association in Delhi, and in Jadavpur University, the comparalistic dealing with that the Indian literature also necessary to had to look at that the interplay between that the mainstream, that the popular, the elite, and that the marginalized, and also to some extent so foreground intermedical perspective of that the different form of that existed together, and and that the composite manners, and the particularly in the earlier periods in which textual and the performative tradition exists simultaneously. And the department of the continues developing the teaching materials of the various aspect of the Indian literature from the comparative perspective, beginning from the language origins, manuscripts, cultures, performative traditional, along with the painting, scriptures, and architecture, the history of the print culture, and this question related to the modernity, that comparative literature studied the necessary, and to be the interdisciplinary was the highlighted by pedagogy of the practicing in the department, and by according to T.S. Satyanand, developed the theory of scriptocentric, body-centric, and the phonocentric study of the text in the medieval period, leading a number of researchers in the department of continuities, and the intervenues in the tradition that would again lead the pluralistic and epistemologies in the study of Indian literature and culture. And the third, we see the centers of the comparative literature. In the 1986, a new full-fledged department of the comparative literature was established, and the Veer Narmad South Gujarat University in Surat, where focus was India literature in the Western India. In 1999, the department of the Dravidian comparative literature and philosophy was established in the Dravidian University, Kuppam. It must also be the mention that the comparative poetics as core areas of the comparative literature studies, and that the studies dissertations, particularly in the south, was taken up as a center area of the research by the Vishwanath Kaviraj Institute of the Comparative Literature and the Aesthetic in the Orissa. During this period, the National Association of the Comparative Literature came into being. One at the Jadavpur called Indian Comparative Literature Association, and the other in Delhi named the Comparative Indian Literature Association. The two named the two had the merged in the 1992. The Comparative Literature Association of the India was formed, which today has more than the thousand of the members. In early years of the association, and the large number of the creative writers, and the perspective in that the conferences, along with the academic and the researcher, each enriching horizon and the vision of the other. And here's a rectification of the area of comparison. Here's some example of in the this part. The along with that, the Indian literature of the Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the 100 years of solitude, became a part of the syllabus, of which few other texts in Latin America literature, and then literature from African countries were included. As for the other areas of studies components, the department today hosts the Center of African, Latin American, and the Canadian studies, where some of the researcher work. The annual seminars are organized. A few like that the present author are the opinion that given the relatively small number of the policy, and in that the attention from some of the key challenges in the comparative literature studies in India, the namely that the systematically the amalgamation of the data related and the Indian context and the analysis from the comparative perspective, and so perhaps the mapping of the interculture relations with that among India's neighborhood in countries. The bonds and the woodworks were very popular in romanticism. They felt that they are the romanticism was the marked by inner strength and the serenity. The much of texts about that the angst of the romantic poet was viewed negatively. The love of that the sincerity and health went back the classical period and seems as an important value in the tradition. Now, I further presentation, I would like to call Khushbu.
Thank you, Anjali. As we saw that, as Anjali has already told, that along with Indian literatures, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude became a part of the syllabus with a few other texts from Latin American literatures and the literatures from African countries included. So, The 100 Years of Solitude is a book by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and and this writer has won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And this novel is translated into more than 46 languages, in almost 46 languages, and it is the magnum opus in the world literature. And we can compare, in this novel there is magical realism, and in this we can compare this novel with The Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. In both the novels we can find the magical realism. And if another example we can give, then it is of the Moby Dick by Herman Melville and Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. Both the Don Quixote is originally written in early modern Spanish language, and in this the character of Quixote became an archetype, and the word quixotic, used to mean the impractical pursuit of idealistic goal, entered common usage. And this is also the most translated book in the world. So, in both these novels, Moby Dick and John Quixote, we can see that the main protagonists are trying to pursue something which is practically impossible, a utopian like situation, trying to achieve the impossible goals. And again, next examples we can see, then there is comparison of poets and different writers like Shelley and Byron are compared, and the former having introduced softness and sentimentality to Bengali poetry, and they were often praised for upholding human rights and liberty, in contrast to the imperialist poetry of Kipling. So, contemporary political needs then were linked with literary values, and this explained the contradictory tensions often found in the reception of Romanticism in Bengal. It must be mentioned that Shelley, the poet of revolt, began to a very positive reception when the independence movement gathered momentum. Then we have, from reception studies, the focus gradually turned to cross-cultural reception, where reciprocity and exchange among cultures were studied. For example, one tried to study the romantic movement from a larger perspective. So then it is a comparison that romanticism first developed in India or Europe. From Sanskrit, the text was translated into German, and again it came back to India, as if it was thought that romanticism came from European nations to India, but actually it was already translated from Sanskrit to German languages. Then we have reception studies, both along with vertical and horizontal lines, formed the next major area of focus. One studied, for instance, elements of ancient and medieval literature in modern texts, and also inter and interliterary relations, foregrounding impacts and responses. So, while one studied Vedic, Upanishads, Buddhist, and Jain elements in modern texts, one looked at clusters of sermons by Buddha, Mahavira, and Nanak. So, all these scriptures that we have, Upanishads, Veds, and all that, it is written in Sanskrit language, but it spread it all across the world, and there many translators have translated from Sanskrit to English and European languages. So this way, the knowledge of this Sanskrit was spread all over the world through translations, and this we can practically observe in the T.S. Eliot's Wasteland and in other such texts. Then we have the introduction. Then we have certain more courses like cross-cultural literary transactions, where Rudyard Kipling's Kim and Rabindranath Tagore's Gora, they were also taken for the comparison. And literary transactions, one looked more precisely at the tradition of reason and rationalism in European and Indian literatures of 18th and 19th centuries. Then, the Department of English and Comparative Literary Studies at Saurashtra University, Rajkot, took up the theme of Indian Renaissance and translated several Indian authors into English, studied early travelogues from Western India to England, and in general published collections of theoretical discourses from the 19th century. Then we have many other various departments all over the India and later into the world, which where this field was widespreading across. Then, from a very different perspective, it was felt that stories, poems, and performance from oral traditions that were found most parts of the country had their own knowledge system that could provide valuable and sustainable alternatives um, to contemporary modern urban modes of life, and living in several cases also reveals certain cultural dynamics and value systems that were constantly replenishing mainstream expressive traditions. So, certain folk tales and folklores, which are normally poems and bhajans and all that we can say, they are not recorded anywhere. They are known to few people only, 4 to 5 people. So, if they die, then all the special literature we can say that is lost if it is not recorded or documented in any form. So the steps were taken to record all these things. And in this area also we can do the comparison of cultures and languages. Then second area in the Center for Advanced Studies was the interface between literatures of India and its neighboring countries. The first preliminary research in this area led to the links that suggested continuity and constant series of interaction between Asian cultures and communities since ancient times, and urgent need for work in this area in order to enter into meaningful dialogue with one another in Asian context and to uncover different parts of creative communication. Efforts towards this and led to an international conference on South-South dialogues with a large number of participants from Asian and European countries. So, various culture of to study the culture of various countries, not only from one country but from India and Asian and other countries, to know more about the culture and diversity of all over the world. Then we have the projects. Many projects were undertaken. The Inter-Asian series on travelogues from Bengal to Asian countries and annotated bibliography that could provide an initial foundation for the study of interliterary relations was published. Then second project involved working on the image of Burma in Bengali and Oriya literature in the late 19th and early 20th century. Travel narratives and diaries, newspaper articles from old periodical excerpts from literature and pictorial images of Burmese people in the India press were compiled. So all these things, diaries and newspaper articles to study the culture of the various countries. Then we have interface with translation studies and cultural studies. It must be mentioned at this point that comparative literature in the country in the 21st century engaged with two other related fields of study. One was translation studies and the other was cultural studies. Translation studies covers different areas of literary studies. Histories of translation may be used to map literary relations, while analysis of acts of translation leads to the understanding of important characteristics of both the source and target literary and cultural systems. As for cultural studies, comparative literature has always engaged with different aspects of cultural studies, the most prominent being literature and its relation with different arts and other disciplines. For instance, a course in Delhi University takes up the theme of city and village in the Indian literature and goes into representation of habitants system. So where you compare the city and and the village. So what is the culture of city and what is the village of culture of the village? The difference is in the language, in the culture, in the habits, in the daily life, and all that. So to study the cultures and the accounts of travelers from Greece, China, Persia, and Portugal demonstrate the differences that exist at the levels of perception and ideological positions. Then we have, it is evident that comparative literature in country today has multifaceted goals and visions in accordance with historical needs, both local and planetary. As in the case of humanities and literary studies, the discipline is to engage with issues that would lead to enhancement of civilization gestures against forces that are divisive and constantly reduce the potential of human beings. In doing so, it is engaged in discovering new links and lines of non-hierarchical connectivity of what Kumkum Sungari in a recent article called co-construction, a process anchored in subtle and complex histories of translation, circulation, and extraction. And Comparative works with the knowledge that a lot remains to be done. So not everything is covered. This is a vast area. Although the job chances are less in this area, but many things are uncovered and still not, a lot needs to be explored. And there are lots of scopes for the research in this area. So the task of construction of literary histories in terms of literary relations among the neighboring regions and of larger wholes, one primary task of comparative literature today has perhaps yet to begin. In all its endeavors, however, the primary aim of some of the early architects of the discipline to nurture and foster creativity to continues as a subaltern force. These are citations. Thank you.
So questions?
Okay, so my question to Shubhu and Anjali, that how it comparative literature centers are developed in India.
The concept of comparative literature in India received an impetus from Rabindranath Tagore's lecture delivered on the subject when he was invited by National Council of European of Education in 1907. But the idea of comparative literature suggested by the practicing comparatists is different from the idea expressed by Tagore.
So I have a question that which types of area are covered by comparative literature?
Yes, Chignex, the comparative literature covers the area of influence, analogy, thematology, translation study, and the and the art, the cultural arts, and within the translation studies, the comparative literature is not comparative study is not possible. Thank you.
Okay, so now the next pair of for the presentation. This is the fourth one now. No? We have